Rock Around the Blockade is a campaign in solidarity with Cuba. We campaign against the US blockade for the freedom of the Cuban Five, and we highlight the gains of the Cuban Revolution and the example that it gives to the rest of the world that an alternative is possible. We hold film showings, educationals, we run fundraising music nights, and every 2 years we send a solidarity brigade to Cuba, where young activists from this country get the chance to go out to Cuba, learn about Cuban society, how it functions, and then come back here and use that experience for their work campaigning in solidarity with Cuba here in Britain.
So I came here to learn about it. I was really inspired by the personal accounts, because you know the history. There's personal accounts of the Cuban ambassador. That was really good. So that's what I'm going to take away from this.
Well, why is it important for you in particular?
For me, I think it's quite inspiring for me, because I didn't know any personal accounts before I came here, and now I know what it's like to be. She was about my age, she was only 2 years younger than me, so it was lots of 15-year-old boys and girls just like me. I'm just imagining people at my school, imagining us joining to defend the revolution here. How amazing would that be?
So I'm Derek Wall, I'm a Green Party councillor in Berkshire, and I'm interested in green politics and socialism. I thought it was just such a brilliant event, because I know Cuba isn't perfect. As somebody said, it's made of human beings and we're imperfect. But Cuba is such a tremendous example, and from a green point of view, bringing in the organic, and bringing in transport that works and wind energy, and it's the one really good example of sustainable development. And then, without making a long speech, people forget that Cuba helped end apartheid. When the South Africans invaded Angola, they went, even though the Soviet Union told them not to go, and fought the apartheid regime and helped bring it down. And you look at things like all of their kind of disaster relief. So absolutely superb. And the Americans wanted to snuff that out, with their mercenaries. So it's been really inspiring to come and hear the ambassador, and great to have a woman ambassador. So really inspiring, and something that I can really take back and that will inspire me in my politics. So thank you so much for putting the event on.
I thought it was a great meeting. It was beautiful to see such a diverse audience, and it's very important for us to learn about Cuba and the Cuban Revolution, because the way our media portray it is so distorted that it's difficult to understand what is happening there without delving deeper into the subject. And the reason Latin America, in a wider context, is so important is because what's happening in North Africa and Western Asia now with the uprisings has happened in Latin America 10 years ago, and has resulted in anti-imperialist governments in Ecuador and Venezuela and Bolivia and Cuba, and these governments are leading an anti-imperialist struggle that is fighting against the US and UK-led empire, and they are winning that struggle.
I thought it was really eye-opening. It kind of exposed the lies that the US like to spread about Cuba, and exposed the good sides to Cuba, which is never spoken about. You shouldn't trust everything that you read, and it shows that Cuba does show the alternative. The US just want to try and stifle that and try and make it look like their society is the only society that works, when it really doesn't. There's another way.
And a really interesting event, especially when we know the Cuba's example is the seal that follow many Latin American countries and many more around the world. And Bolivia has benefited a lot with the Cuban help in terms of health and education. So, a great example for the world.
As I have been introduced, I am the new ambassador of Cuba to the UK. I've been here for 6 months now. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for having invited me, Rock Around the Blockade, for having invited me to be this very well-attended meeting of Friends of Cuba. It's an honor to be here with you to honor this and commemorate this historical event that is known as the Bay of Pigs. I even never used that word only for the purpose of clarification, but the victory of Playa Giron.
Y esto ha sido fundamental lo que ha sido la experiencia de la Revolución Cubana, no solo por la forma como llega al poder, sino la forma como se ha mantenido a lo largo de más de 50 años. En este momento, América Latina ve a Cuba como un aliado en la lucha por construir un mundo mejor, a diferencia de lo que ocurría a finales del siglo XX, donde veían a Cuba como la responsable de los grandes males que ocurrían en América Latina. En la actualidad, Cuba forma parte de una alianza política con distintos países de América Latina, a pesar de las pretensiones de los Estados Unidos de aislar a Cuba durante más de 50 años. Cuba es América Latina y América Latina es Cuba.
Cuba is Latin America and now Latin America is Cuba.
Muchas gracias.
It features, I think, of colonialism and neo-colonialism is it sets up a dichotomy between the problem. What is the problem? The problem is them outside, it's imperialism. What's the solution? The solution is us. And I think one of the lessons that comes out of the Bay of Pigs is we together can actually organise that solution. Now, of course, the Bay of Pigs does set off clearly a definably socialist character to the revolution. That's to say, it's the first time that Fidel uses the word socialism publicly. Plenty have used it less publicly, but not necessarily privately, so it's not actually a reaction to what's going on, it's a confirmation of what's going on. And I think that the drift towards socialism, which is already evident, becomes much clearer, much more marked, much more defined, but defined in a very Cuban way. One thing that's very clear, when you look at that speech on 16th of April, actually socialism only gets mentioned once. Patria gets mentioned, Nación gets mentioned, Territorio gets mentioned. It's the same revolution as it was in '59, but it has moved in a particular direction, more anti-imperialist and now more definably socialist.
And I'm just going to read you one small bit that I mean, there's from a CIA agent called David Phillips. He says this was the atmosphere in the CIA's war room after, when the operation fails. He said the agency men around him, he said one was white with remorse and fatigue, one held his hand across his face as if hiding, one scratched his wrists viciously, blood stained his cuffs and darkened his fingernails, and one simply vomited into a wastebasket. So they were pretty upset that that's the way to go down. And then, of course, the reaction of the Kennedy brothers is absolute fury and humiliation. They feel they've been completely humiliated by this. They've been humiliated by the CIA. They've been humiliated by the Castro brothers. This begins a vendetta that I'm sure many people here know about, things like Operation Mongoose and many attempts to assassinate Fidel Castro kind of came out of that. The one thing I want to say, so the results of this operation for the US are completely disastrous. Not only does it not achieve its objectives, it achieves the opposite of its objectives, which is that it increases Fidel Castro's control of the government. Of course, it makes him hugely more popular. It makes him hugely more credible among the international community. It really encourages the Soviets to send him a lot more weapons. And I think particularly one aspect of it that people don't always realise is, and this is from a letter from Walt Rostow, who's one of Kennedy's closest national security advisors, that he wrote to Kennedy on the 21st of April, so just 2 days after the Bay of Pigs fails. He wrote, said, clearly we must cope with Castro in the next several years, but let us do some fresh homework. Vietnam is the place where, in Bobby Kennedy's phrase, we must prove that we're not a paper tiger. We have to prove that Vietnam and Southeast Asia can be held. So the Vietnam War is most directly a response to the Bay of Pigs. So what can I say? Disaster beginning to end. Thank you very much for listening.
I'll give you a few brief examples because it's really worth thinking about in the context of Britain today. In the 1990s, during an economic crisis, Cuba's share of GDP on social programs increased by 34%. Cuban doctors increased 76%. Daycare centres for old people, 107%, they more than doubled. Homes for people with disabilities, 47%. Compare this to Britain. In our current economic crisis, public services are being slashed. So Cuba helps us to expose exposed the lie that there is no alternative. Infant mortality fell within 10 years in Cuba from 89 to 99 during an economic crisis from 11.1 per thousand to 6.4 per thousand. Today, or last year in 2010, it fell below Britain at 4.5 per thousand live births. Life expectancy also rose. And Cuba's medical internationalism increased, as I said. In 5 decades of the Cuban Revolution, 100,000 Cuban doctors have provided free healthcare overseas, saving and improving lives. In January 2010, we know Haiti experienced a terrible, horrific earthquake, but there were already 350 Cuban doctors serving in Haiti. And they were providing healthcare to between 60 and 70% of the Haitian population. Cuba set up the Latin American School of Medicine. It has thousands of people, not just from Latin America now, from Africa, even from the United States, who are training absolutely free to qualify as medical professionals and return to poor communities. Operation Milagro, Operation Miracle, which was set up in Venezuela to restore sight to people, has now helped nearly 2 million people from 35 countries. Cuba's literacy campaign by 2008 had helped 3,600,000 people learn to read and write in 23 countries. And I finish with one of my favourite slogans. The more Cuba resists, the more she is respected, and Cuba is ready to win the respect of the entire world.